Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last Schools Forum of the year. Thank you very much for attending today. Apologies about the heat in the room. Apparently some of the windows are open, but that makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So we'll just have to swelter together. I know we are anticipating that there may well be one or two more people who will join us partway through, but Simon, we'll start with the apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we received a few apologies today, understandably at the end of term. We received apologies from Stephen Drew, Vicky Lewis, Abigail Rourke, Mark Bowie, Emily Vero, Lindy Nyrup, Nicola Mason, Mark Davis, Chris Dobson, Katie Adams, Katie Hinns. We've also received apologies from Anne Tapp, but Anne has also tendered her resignation. Unfortunately, she's not able to get to the meeting, so we'll be going out to appoint somebody to that position in the new term.
Super, thank you. The good news is that we're still quorate, so we can proceed with the agenda and take the votes where we need to. Okay, item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in items on the agenda?
I'm connected to schools that are mentioned in paper 7 on notice of concerns.
Thank you. Duly noted. Any others? Nope. Okay. I know these were sent out slightly later. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of April. Is everybody happy that they are an accurate reflection of the discussion that was had at the last Schools Forum? Okay, on that basis, are there any I beg your pardon?
We usually don't we usually have the officials listed, but there was no officials listed on these minutes.
Sorry, officials listed.
Normally we have the officials listed and the presenters listed, but there wasn't anybody listed on the minutes.
I'm sorry, Steve, I'm not sure what you're talking about. The official...
Normally, like when Tim's here and everything else, it's noted that Tim was present, etc. For example.
Okay. That's a good question. Actually, I'll have a look at that because they will have been marked as in attendance, so yeah. they should have gone on to the minutes. But that's a good point. I'll look at that, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Any other issues around the accuracy of the minutes? Put your mic on, please, Philip. Can you put your mic on?
Yeah, sorry. Apologies for being a little bit late as well. Yes, there was just a matter arising from, in the minutes of the last meeting, it was stated about the SCC had listened to early years concerns about the possible new agreement and decided at the moment not to have a new provider agreement, but that people should be mindful of what's in the legislation. Well, that has now changed. There is, I've got to be careful here because there is a draft agreement in existence, but it can't be discussed. And the reason for bringing it up is that I know that we're all under really difficult time constraints, and there must have been a lot of legal issues to think about before making this draft. But we, the sector, or rather, to be more accurate, the early years group, which represents the sector, has only been given 2.5 days for any comments. And I just really wanted to draw it to people's attention that that's a very short space of time for a very complex, there may be very complex issues in the draft and in the eventual agreement that we're all asked to sign. So that was the first point, that that's a very short space of time. And the second point is to propose, if I may, that we have either a face-to-face meeting in early years to discuss the points that may be in this draft, because it is really important, I think. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to respond on behalf of the local authority with regards to those points?
Philip, have you spoken with anybody about your views regarding the consultation and the suggestion of a meeting?
I haven't yet. I've only had it a day, really. I was away at the beginning of the week, so the answer's no. Not yet. But I fully intend to, obviously, as soon as I can. Or we do, rather.
I mean, if you're happy to drop me a note, just summarising those couple of points, and I'll pick it up with Tim and with Helen Gibson. Cool.
The problem probably is that I can't do that because we're sworn to secrecy, sort of thing, aren't we? It's confidential outside of the early years group, but I'll make the point, yes, to you in brief. Yeah, thank you. Sorry to be.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Andrew. I know Steve had a number of points with regards to the notice of concern, licence deficits and matters arising, but I've asked him to raise those under item 7. Are there any other matters arising under item 4? Okay, then we shall move on to item 5, which is decisions taken by the chair under delegated powers that confirm that there have been none. I'm happy to confirm that. Item 6, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so item 6 relates to the, just giving you an update on the election process that took place. So obviously, I'm sure you remember at the last meeting I mentioned that there were a number of members whose 4-year tenure was coming to an end. So we did the usual process of going out and looking for replacements. Pleased to say that was a reasonably successful process. Not quite as good as 2 years ago when I did it, but just for the record, Stephen, Drew and Steve Swatton have been appointed back to the all-maintained primary positions. We welcome Ian Turnbull as a new member for the all-secondary academies. Mark Bowie has rejoined and Emily Vera has rejoined, and we also welcome Nikki Clifton as an all-secondary academy representative. Good news that Alan and Steve were also reappointed by their organisations or the forums they represent. We've also welcomed Ryan Halford, who's our 16 to 19 education representative. Philip Siddell and Sadie Jones, welcome back, appointed again. And also just yesterday, and just this morning in fact, we've now got a representative from the Birmingham Diocese Schools Commission named Tom James. He'll be joining us from the November meeting onwards. And that's as a result of quite a big bringing together of academies, some that are Birmingham based, some that are Walsall based, Wolverhampton based, and also Staffordshire based, so who'll be joining us from the next meeting. We do unfortunately still have 2, now 3 with ANTAP's resignations, vacancies in the all primary academy section. So we'll be going out again in September, give her a few weeks to get back to work, and then we'll go out again and we'll try and get some representatives in place. I will obviously let you all know in case you've got colleagues who are willing to join the forum, and we'll see if we can fill those spaces ready for the November meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, and a warm welcome to new colleagues around the table. Item 7 then. Steve, I'm going to ask you to raise the points you wanted to raise under item 4 before I ask Mel to feedback.
Yes, thank you, Alan. There were a couple of points. One really could have been a matter arising because it referred to in the minutes of the last meeting, and the other one is a separate one, but it's also in a sense related to notices of concern. We asked the question, or we asked for clarification, which Tim gave us at the last meeting, that if a notice of concern had been issued, there was usually a series of monitoring visits, and that the local authority paid for the first one, but that the school was then invoiced for subsequent visits. And a question that has arisen, as I was asked to raise, is whether schools have any option as to whether they receive further monitoring visits, and if so, how many? And B, is there any process of quality assurance that actually provides some reassurance that those follow-up monitoring visits are, in terms of very hard-pressed school budgets, actually value for money? So that was the first point.
Okay, should we take response? Who's going to respond on to that? Sarah?
If you are in a position of a notice of concern, then I think there isn't any leeway on the number of visits that you would receive. No. Don't know if anyone else wants to come in on any of the other points.
Okay, so to clarify, you're saying that there's no variability in the number of visits that a school has to have as a consequence of being put on a notice of concern. Okay, and then to the second point around the quality assurance process.
Yes, Steve, I'll pick that up in a little more detail. So any school that has been issued with a notice of concern or a licence deficit, it's been agreed with Tim, Sarah, we have meetings with FCC that those schools will all need to have a termly visit. Those are the chargeable visits apart from the first option. Piece of work that we did at the end of last year, we actually looked at the school's budget notification forms for the start of 24-25, looked at what the budgets the schools were submitting were, and then we compared those to how those schools ended the year, and we did see some significant reductions in deficits. I've not got those figures on me. I don't know if Tim or Sarah would want to share those, but it's some information we can look at getting to you.
Thank you. So, I mean, are schools who have found themselves in that position, are they invited to give any feedback on the process and the support they've had and how it might be perhaps changed or for the benefit of other schools who follow on?
Yeah, so as part of those visits, what we do is an accountant will visit, they'll look in detail at the school and they'll produce a report. That report will have recommendations in. The following visits will follow up on those recommendations, see which the schools have found useful, which they've managed to implement, which they haven't, which recommendations they haven't managed to implement, and the reasons before that. That all gets fed back to myself and Libby Waterhouse, who's the team leader on Schools in Difficulty. We identify what's working, what's not working. Schools are always welcome to email me with any feedback they feel is necessary from those visits.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure you appreciate that the pressure that school budgets are under now is that they're quite rightly scrutinising everything in the expenditure column. Thank you. The other point, looking at the agenda, Alan, the other point I think is probably better if I raise it under item 11 rather than now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on to item 7 then. In earnest, notice of concern and licence deficit agreements.
Okay, so the paper is our standard paper that comes to forum for Staffordshire maintained schools. It lists our licence deficit plans and notice of concerns that we've issued this year. The licence deficit plans and notice of concerns are issued on an annual basis now, so there is some repetition from the schools that were reported to forum last January. Due to our changes in processes and procedures, we've been able to bring those plans and notice of concerns to forum a lot earlier this time. What we've actually done is schools have submitted their budget notification forms and locked and published budgets in Access by the 31st of May. We've actually used those as a basis to look at which schools are looking at a deficit currently, in the current year and for future years. We've then looked at those budgets. The problem we've had with budgets this year is schools had to submit budgets by the end of May. There was then a couple of grants that came in around that time, so some schools, when they've submitted their governor approved budget hadn't actually included a couple of grants. They weren't able to include the NI grant, or they weren't actually able to include the school budget share grant. So it's a piece of work that we've done. We've looked at governor approved budgets, and then we've adjusted where necessary for those grants that the schools haven't built in. On that basis, we've then issued the licence deficits, where schools actually ended 24-25 in a deficit position, and those schools are listed in point 5 on the paper. We also have listed a couple of schools who are showing a budgetary deficit in 25-26, and those schools also received licence deficit plans. We have issued notice of concerns for those schools who are showing a deficit in year 2. Those schools are listed in point 6. And then further down the paper, we've actually listed those schools who actually received a plan last year. So in January, we reported to Forum, and they've actually had those licence deficit plans or notice of concerns retracted this year. So that's why I'd like to think that the work we're doing with those schools is really an example of it working, because those schools have gone from being on a plan to not being on a plan now. Those schools are reported in notes 7, 8 and 9. There's also a comment that we are looking at schools who are showing a deficit in year 3. We will be reviewing those schools to see if we feel they do need a notice of concern. That will be based on the size of the deficit, the trajectory of their budget, a lot of different factors, and that will be more of a judgment call on those. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on this item, please, from the floor? No? Thank you very much. Okay, item 8. Update to the Staffordshire scheme for financing schools and financial regulations. Now, Forum will need to approve this item. So, over to you.
Hi all. This report covers several recommended amendments to the Staffordshire scheme for financing schools and finance regulations for schools. The report has been brought here because any amendments to these documents require approval of Schools Forum, as Anne's just explained, unless they relate to changes mandated by central government, which isn't the case this time. The report lists all the changes that are proposed, and I don't intend to repeat the entire report here, as I presume Forum members have already had an opportunity to read the paper. There are a number of suggested amendments to the financial regulations. These mainly relate to strengthening areas where school audits regularly find issues, amending links that need to be updated, adding or rewording sections to provide further clarification to schools. Where we are suggesting rewording or expansion of an existing point, I have had to include words that are already part of the regulations as part of the report in order for the report to make sense. Please don't go away with the impression that much of this was not already covered by the existing regulations. For example, we want to amend the regulations to say that any new fee or charge must be approved by the full governing body. Previously, that would have just said needed to be approved by governors. There's one suggested amendment to the Staffordshire scheme for financing schools. We would like to update the document to state that a notice of concern may be issued when years 2 or 3 of the school's published multi-year modeller indicates that the school cannot operate within their in-year funding and reserves are not sustainable. Previously, this read years 2 and 3. Also, I will just give special mention to the suggested scheme of delegation for schools, a copy of which is included in the report. In the past, this has been a separate document. However, we are proposing adding this to the amended scheme as an appendix to the financial regulations in order that it can easily be found. Any questions?
Can I just double check in terms of if we're happy to approve this, then the suggested changes will go into the governor's handbook. They'll be sent out to schools in the autumn term. Super, thank you. Steve?
Yes, it's the pedant in me again, I'm afraid. 8D, I'm pretty sure I know what it means, but it's changes to the travel and subsistence forms. It says the wording states that you are responsible for the accuracy of additional hours claimed. I mean, I suspect that's just been taken from the form, but it just reads, I'm not expecting to comment on it, but perhaps you could just have a look at that and see whether... you can just have a look at that. And the other point, just for the record, in paragraph 14, it says that a scheme of delegation or a sample scheme of delegation has been added as an appendix so that it can be easily found. Just for the record, it always used to be there, and it mysteriously disappeared, and I'm delighted to see that it's back again because it's useful and important, I think. There's just that word added that I was, again, being pedantic about.
Thank you, Steve. Any other pedants in the room who want to go? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll take that as everybody's happy to approve those, unless we have any objections. Okay, thank you very much. Item 9, we'll move on to Growth Fund Allocation. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an annual report which comes to Forum, which asks members to note the allocations that we've made in respect of Growth Fund for 3 elements: for infant class size, exceptional basic need growth, where we're asking schools to admit additional children as a one-off, and also for the costs pre and post opening of new free schools. So the paper details the allocations in all those 3 categories. In addition to that is a recommendation regarding the funding for new free schools. As the paper explains, the figures, the annual amounts that have been allocated to free schools haven't increased for since 2018, and the proposal here is to recognise that costs have gone up, and symbolically, I think is the right term, to actually apply the annual CPI inflation rate to future allocations, and to do that annually. If colleagues have any questions arising from the allocations or the request for increased funding.
Mr. Barr.
Sorry, it's me again. Is there references, new schools clearly, and there are references in the paper to local authority maintained or academies. Is there any prospect that the local authority will be considering new schools as possibly being maintained by the LA rather than academies?
There has been no intent, no comment, no statement, or requirement even for us to consider local authority maintained schools. Whether that position changes in the light of recent changes, I can't comment upon, but we're satisfied with the process that enables strong academy trusts to open free schools in Staffordshire.
Thank you, Andrew. A very diplomatic answer.
Any other questions for Andrew with regards to this item? Okay, so the first part was to note the allocations, and the second part is to approve the annual uplift in funding for the new free schools by the CPI rate. Is Forum happy to approve that? Any objections? No. Okay, that's carried. Item 10, Wraparound Childcare Programme. Unfortunately, Kevin's been unable to attend the meeting, so it's going to be deferred to the autumn. But obviously, colleagues will have had the opportunity to have read the details that have been sent through, and they were for information and comment anyway. Are there any comments that anybody would like to raise now at this point, noting that it'll be discussed again in the autumn meeting? Katie?
Thanks, Alan. The only thing I'd like to request, please, is if middle schools as a group could have some contact from somebody regarding how wraparound care and breakfast clubs may work within the middle school context, given the size and that many are deemed secondary.
Yep, thank you, Katie. Duly noted. Steve?
Yeah, I mean, if it's coming back to the autumn meeting, I'm sure the paper will be updated anyway, but it'd be interesting to see how there's a reference to the ambition that every parent should have access by September next year, and there's also a reference to a potential underspend at the end of this financial year, next April. So if we could request that there's an update in the paper for the, I think it's November meeting on those 2 points. I'm sure that would have happened anyway, but thank you.
Yep, duly noted. Philip?
No, I did have some questions about the capital, the revenue capital funding. In other words, the working capital funding, but presumably I can just take those up with Kev in the meantime anyway. So, thank you.
Yep. Yep.
It was just to say the inclusive practice pathway work that's happened as part of this scheme, so the allocation that came from the DFE. It might be a question, but just to say, I know that's been welcomed. Sometimes for wraparound care providers and school providers, the movement with staff is turnover is quite high. It maybe isn't seen as a typical career, or more of a move to get experience to do other things, which is always fab. But it was a question of whether that may continue on afterwards, because as we know from everything in the media at the moment, the move for more children who require additional support being in mainstream for longer, wraparound is the wraparound staff team are going to need that as much as school members of staff, and it was just to say that. I know it's been welcomed, it's been of high quality, but it will be a future view as well as just the duration of this project.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions with regards to this item? No. Okay. Thank you. Item 11, schools budget outturn. Sarah?
This report details the final outturn position for 2024-2025, which was an overall overspend of £22.8 million. This was largely a result of the about 27 million overspend in the high needs block. However, this overspend was also offset by a net underspend in the early years block of 1.5 million, net of a government clawback of prior years' early year funding. This mainly relates to surplus DSG receipts, and we anticipate the majority of that will be recouped by government next year through a clawback adjustment once final census figures have been verified. And savings in central and delegated budgets of 2.7 million, mainly surplus growth fund money as approved by Schools Forum last year as part of the agreed deficit recovery plan. In accordance with the government's statutory override, this has been charged against the DSG reserve, which is now in deficit by £53.6 million. This is up from a deficit of £30.8 million at the start of the year. Whilst we are not alone in this position, this remains a serious financial risk to the authority. Given the forecast overspend this year in the high needs block, the deficit is expected to increase further to over 90 million. The Council has a DSG management plan in place to mitigate as far as possible the current high needs block overspend. However, this will take time and will only partially impact on the expected overspend. Even with our best endeavours, we anticipate the deficit will worsen considerably over the next few years. More on this in the high needs block standing item. School reserves at the end of 2024-2025 were £16.1 million, a reduction of £2.1 million from the end of 23-24, due mainly to schools converting to academies. There continue to be a number of licence deficits, 19 schools with a deficit revenue balance as of the 31st of March 2025 of £4.1 million, and we continue to work with those schools to manage the situation. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Sarah on the final outturn budget? Mr. Barr?
It's not actually a question, it's more a request. In the past, as an appendix, there's been a breakdown of the outturn for individual schools, and that I haven't trawled back through all the records to when that disappeared, but it's something that we find quite useful, and I wondered whether that could be reinstated. If there's any particular reason why it's not shared anymore.
So I think we stopped sharing it when more schools started to become academies, and so it was felt that we were only sharing part of the picture. However, we are going to release that information after the meeting.
Yeah, I had at the back of my mind it was something to do with the academisation, but if it is going to be made available again, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Sarah, is it you again? Over to you. So high needs block, EBT and DMP.
So this is the regular report outlining the latest position on the high needs block as per the request of Schools Forum, given the ongoing pressures in this area. As usual, I won't go through the paper in full, as I presume Forum members have already had an opportunity to read the paper. To summarise, the paper outlines a forecast overspend in the 2025-2026 high needs block of £38.5 million. This is despite an increase in government funding of about 7.8% and the 0.5% transfer from the schools block, which in total have increased the high needs block budget to £147 million. As in the last few years, this budget increase is insufficient to keep pace with rising demand and costs, and the funding gap has increased to its largest ever amount. 2 years ago, we were reporting EHCP numbers were increasing by 400 to 500 per annum. Since last July, EHCP numbers are up over 800 to over 9,000, an increase of about 31% in the last 3 years. This is impacting across all areas, but especially the independent sector, with numbers now around 820 and forecast to increase to around 900 by the end of the year, which would represent approximately a 55% increase in 3 years. Importantly, the paper also outlines the significant decline in DSG reserves, which are now in deficit by £53.6 million. We expect this to deepen further, and by the end of the year to be around £90 million. Left unaddressed, the accumulated deficit is likely to be over £350 million by the end of 2029-30. As we are all aware, this is a national concern, and the government has put in place a statutory override requiring that accumulated DSG deficits should remain ring-fenced separate to the Council's other reserves. This was due to cease at the end of 2025-2026. However, the government have recently announced a further extension to the override, which is now due to end in March 2028, by which time, based on current forecasts, the deficit will be around £200 million. This extension does not resolve the very real impact on the Council's cash reserves. Currently, the Council is losing annual revenue returns of about £4 million per annum in lost interest. Furthermore, although details of the government's intended approach to SEM reform are expected in a schools white paper in the autumn, and despite indications from government that it will also set out further details on supporting local authorities as part of the upcoming local government funding reform consultation, it is still unknown how the government will expect authorities to deal with their accumulated shortfalls once the statutory override ends. The paper goes on to outline again the actions and plans currently in the DSG management plan. Despite best endeavours and the fact that the percentage of pupils in mainstream has increased slightly, it's probably fair to say that so far this has achieved little impact financially. We're currently updating the DSG management plan, and it's anticipated the next review with the DFE will be scheduled for late August, early September, following an update to the forecast of pupil numbers and finances. The report then goes on to detail the LA's commitment to reintroducing a refreshed educating banding tool in 2026, with the added element of using artificial intelligence to support a robust quality assurance process. This would potentially mean EBT levels would only be shared with schools at the point of the final EHCP being issued, but with the added introduction of an appeals process should the funding allocated be in dispute. In addition, the refreshed version includes a redesigned pupil needs profile with additions such as trauma-informed areas for SEMH. To ensure a successful relaunch of the EBT, it's key that we ensure all communication channels remain open between the local authority and all stakeholders during the re-implementation stages, and importantly, we have the full support of Schools Forum to achieve this. The report also gives an update on EAPDR and CDIS, teams of which have now been commissioned in all 8 districts, with Lichfield and Moreland CDIS teams due to commence activity in September 2025. And finally, the report closes with details on a temporary 1-year fixed-term SEND assessment team, which has been brought together to address those assessments beyond the 20-week assessment window caused by the increase in demand for EHCPs. The team started in June and will also be introducing improved ways of working to address assessment timeliness, the quality of plans, and enhance joint working and co-production with children's families and schools. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Steve, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I mean, just one comment and one question. The comment being that there's a reference in the paper quite accurately to the fact that diminishing or disappearing DSG reserves is a sort of double whammy because there's a loss of interest, which is absolutely correct and regrettable in some ways, but I would just make the point that schools are rightly criticised if they sit on large reserves on the grounds that the money's there to be spent, not to be sitting there earning interest. So that's just a personal comment. The other point is you've actually quoted the sentence that I was going to quote about EBT and the education banding tool, which said, which you actually did quote it, artificial intelligence supporting a robust quality assurance process. And I would certainly, I mean, I'm not in any sense Luddite, and I fully appreciate the value of artificial intelligence, but probably not at this meeting. It'd be interesting to have a bit more information about how AI is going to be used in terms of quality assurance. And entirely coincidentally, I was at a meeting this morning where we were given by two of the leads for the local authority on AI. We were given a briefing and they quoted some of the examples as to where it was being applied, and I actually asked whether EBT or education banding tool meant anything to them, and they sort of looked blankly at each other and it didn't. No, that's not criticism at all, because I'm sure it's happening somewhere lower down the food chain, and I have taken it away to look at it. But as I say, it's probably not appropriate now, but it would be interesting to have some more information about how AI is being used in that context.
Thank you, Steve. Yep.
Hello, just a quick question really about the EBT. The reliance for accurate EBT is on the EHCP accuracy and appropriateness. Are the local authority now happy with the quality of the EHCPs that are in place?
Thank you. I'll take that question. Laura, clearly not. It's part of our accelerated progress plan and still remains part of action that the department's monitoring. Sarah touched on the introduction of a ninth district, which is centrally maintained and under my direct line management, and that's picking up the plans that are beyond 20 weeks at the moment. The primary purpose of that team, and it's a one-year fixed-term team at the moment, is to clear and process the plans that are beyond 20 weeks, but also to ensure that we're getting that quality of plan that you're alluding to, and making sure that the quality of the plan is based on good co-production with not only the family, the child, but also the schools, which are involved in that production of that plan. So what you'll see from September is the reintroduction of co-production meetings. I know that's not a new concept. And if you go back to 2015, 2016, it was all the rage, wasn't it, when the Children and Families Act came out. But we are routinely introducing those through that ninth district, and the intention is then to use that as a springboard to roll out that methodology in all 8 district teams.
So whilst that addresses the new plans to school, what about the review of already in place plans and the update of those?
So the methodology I've outlined will be introduced in new plans and reviews going forward. So we have to start somewhere, and new plans appear to me to be the most important if you had to triage, because we've got plans beyond 20 weeks. But as those plans then become into their review cycles, the methodology of Team Around the Child and Family will be our go-to methodology, because it is the correct methodology.
And so will the EBT be introduced before that work has been undertaken?
So my understanding is that a lead officer is going to be appointed to introduce the reintroduction of EBT, and that person is to be confirmed, as you can see from the minutes. The work around the co-production meeting, new ways of working commenced in early July, and will be wholesale from September. So yes, it will be before.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Hallett. Any other questions on that, Katie?
Thank you. It's probably you, Hallett. Just wondered on, so it's a year fixed term for the District 9 team, and I wondered how their work is being scheduled, because I know in some middle schools we've got some plans that are over 40 weeks. So I just wondered on a timeline approximation, if that's all right.
So the District 9 team is specifically there to address the backlog of circa 450 plans that are yes to assess and sitting there either without EdPsych assessment or with EdPsych assessment yet to be written. And they will be across all key stages. In terms of timescales, I'm grateful to Melissa Jones, our Principal EP, who's managed to allocate 300 EdPsych assessments to associates, which is no mean feat, given that there are no EdPsychs in the country that are available to do this work, but she's managed to secure an ethically traded service. So in terms of costs and quality, they're where we would want them to be. There will be some delays, additional delays, in terms of processing those EdPsych assessments, because we're committed to quality assuring what's coming in from the EdPsych assessment, which comes into Laura's question around the quality of the subsequent education, health and care plan. But what I can say is that 300 assessments have been allocated to EPs from Easter. And sorry, that's in additional to the day-to-day assessments that are coming in as well.
I have to say thank you. We have seen an increase in EP support coming through for those children who require them. I just wondered, are you able to share sort of the length of some of the time frames? Because you're saying over 20 weeks, but what's the longest in terms of what you're dealing with at the moment?
I would have to dig into the data, but I'm happy to share the range of beyond 20 weeks, if that's going to be helpful. I mean, I have to add, I'm fairly certain if I was to pull up the data, many of those assessments would be days or weeks beyond the 20 weeks, which is frustrating when we were so close to hitting the 20-week timescale. I would say that the 20-week timescale was based on an aspiration from 2015, on 2015 numbers with 2015 capacity. However, it's a statutory requirement and we're not reaching that as we would want to.
Yes, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is those that are sort of far more overdue, are they going to be the priority first rather than those that have just gone over?
So District 9 and the EP team are working on a first come, first served basis. So the assessments that are due first.
Thank you, Hallett. Thank you, Katie. Any other questions? Yes.
With the concerns over the high needs block, is there a long-term strategy for the LA to reduce the high needs block and the impact of SEND? So is there a long-term strategy for SEND that's going to actually bring the high needs block down?
Without going into an enormous amount of it, Sarah, obviously you can talk about this in greater detail. The deficit management plan is part of the overall picture for looking to manage that and where possible to reduce that. But I don't know, Sarah or Kevin, if you wanted to add a little bit more detail to that.
I was going to add that the deficit management plan's a 4 or 5 year plan. It goes nowhere near addressing the deficit. It goes nowhere near even breaking even on the in-year spend, let alone dealing with the deficit. I don't think nationally anyone knows how the government's going to deal with the accumulated deficits, which for us will be 200 million in 3 years' time. You'll be talking 6 to 10 billion nationally, and you're aware of the issues with the government about the public finances and where that come from. They are bringing forward a white paper, which Harry can probably talk better to about the proposed changes that which may help us deal with those pressures strategically. But right now, under the statute guidance right now, there's no way we can manage that overspend within the resources the government are giving us. We talked about a 7% uplift in funding this year. Compare that to a 10% underlying increase annually on demand. So you're immediately falling behind in real terms, let alone then the increase in costs. An average cost of independent placement in 1 year has gone from 56,000 to 70,000 on average in 1 year for the independent. So you can see why that gap is absolutely exponentially opening up year on year. And we've been forecasting that for 5 years now, that where it's going to go, and it's all come to fruition. And I can't see any other alternative than the direction it is. The talk about, or put the money aside in reserves, that's okay if you've got reserves. Staffordshire are in a very strong financial position that can stand that right now, but there's a very real issue on this ring fencing of DSG grant, which it is ring fenced, but there's a very real issue that it's impacting on the council's interest balances and treasury receipts, which is general fund resources that could be money spent on social workers, on our roads, on many other priorities. And that's completely going unnoticed and unrecognised across the board. It's having a real impact on our other council services right now. So we've been campaigning to government on this issue for a long time, as have everybody else. I think the strategy of kicking the can down the road is a very naive, and we've said that from the outset. This is financially responsible, in our opinion, to have gone there, because when this was introduced in, I'm going to say 2020-21, or there and thereabouts, it was a very small gap at that stage in time, and that was the time to address it really, because what we've been paying for, it wouldn't have been as painful as trying to address a £40 million in year overspend and accumulated deficit of 6 to 10 billion. So to a degree, it's been brought on by the government themselves that we've put ourselves in this position within a 4-year window, and in the next 4 or 5 year windows, you're going to see a lot of authorities hit the buffers without intervention, in my opinion.
Thank you, Anthony. Any other questions or comments on this? The only thing I would say in terms of presentation and optics, I entirely understand why the high needs block and EBT are together in the same item, but in terms of the deficit management plan and the EBT being together in the same item, I think given the premise at the beginning that we were very clear that the EBT wasn't about saving money, it was about ensuring that there was the best support there. So,
but in equal measure, it's about not increasing spend as well in our deficits, and what it had to be pulled, given what we saw on the ground, was a shift upwards in the scale from what we were expecting. So we've had to step back, you'll appreciate, and look at how this works now. It gets implemented across Staffordshire to avoid that, because we'd be even deeper in trouble if we hadn't pulled it, because you could see a definite shift in costs upwards post-implementation.
Laura?
My understanding is that the EBT won't apply to children who are accessing independent specialist settings anyway, so what is the local authority going to do to address that increasing deficit?
Who wants to pick that one up?
I can have a go. In terms of placements and placement costs in the independent sector, we have very few levers. In the same way that social care have very few levers around the providers for placements that they are experiencing, what we have seen is the government put in some regulations around spend in the social care space, and I'm hoping that the white paper, or if not the spin-offs from that paper, will take the same methodology. We are challenging, where possible, the uplifts that are proposed by the independent schools. We have a regional agreement, and I use the term loosely, because it counts on the independent sector agreeing to be part of the agreement. And effectively, there's no economic reason why they would choose to be part of that agreement, because they can set their fees and it's demand-led. So we do challenge, we do go out, we do challenge in terms of provision maps. You're quoting us X and Y for this child. It seems discrepant from the previous quotations we've had. Why is that different? So we have contracts officers who work closely with our SEND practitioners to go out and challenge. And we do challenge almost every single one of the costs that are proposed. Other than doing that, in the absence of a national picture and a national direction, that's all we can do.
Thank you, Hallett. Okay, any other comments or points before we move on? Nope. Okay then. Carl, Section 19, Alternative Education Update.
Thank you. We have obviously submitted a report today. I won't go through every item on it. Just the overview. We've come before to Schools Forum to discuss this issue, and at a previous Schools Forum it was agreed that myself and a small group of representatives from here would meet away from the forum to have a discussion to see if we could come to resolve to bring it back to Schools Forum. Those meetings took place. They were productive in the sense that people did turn up, people did engage, but unfortunately we weren't able to come to a situation where we could agree something that we could bring back to Schools Forum today. So the situation that we find ourselves in is that from that meeting, we agreed that we would put a proposal together as a local authority and that we would bring that proposal to Schools Forum today. And the recommendation from today is that we're seeking the Schools Forum, that the Schools Forum supports the Section 19 recoupment principles for contributions towards the cost of pupils accessing alternative education under Section 19 of the Education Act. Those principles being laid out within the document are very much based on trying to make it efficient and effective process. One of the key issues that I know has been raised by many schools is that the actual DFE guidance talks about individual conversations with individual schools every time a child requires Section 19 alternative provision. With 400 plus schools in Staffordshire and 253 children at one point on the scheme, that would be a very big task for us to meet as a local authority. We are a very small management team. We're not huge. I am the head of attendance and inclusion. I have one deputy. And if it meant us going out weekly to negotiate an individual settlement with each school, you can only imagine how much demand that would make on our very, very limited time. So one of the first principles was that we come up with something that would be a halfway house where it would be effective and economical for the local authority to run, but fair for the schools. Another principle was that Section 19 should only be requested when it's absolutely needed. Again, that's within the guidance. The guidance talks about, when the school has tried its best. Majority of schools, of course, do this, but some don't. So we have to have a process where we evaluate, has everything been done to try and keep this child in school, or are there still endeavours which the school can reasonably undertake to try and accommodate this child? So the next one again was an interesting one, which is to do with the legal aspect of Section 19. There is no law which I can quote that says you must pay Section 19 recoupment to the local authority. We know that. But it is a principle. And the principle is based on that the funding should follow the child. And that is what has been used by many other local authorities who have sought to recoup Section 19 from their schools and share that burden, and it's a growing burden, unfortunately, of children who are unable to attend school through medical illness or other reasons. So what we have said to schools, and what we will always say to schools, is if schools absolutely refuse to pay anything towards the Section 19 contribution, that will not prejudice our provision for that child. We, as a local authority, are a child-centred authority, and we're very proud of that position. And we would never not put provision in place because it meant that it would cost us money that we couldn't recoup from the school. So just to be really clear, and I've always been clear on that point, having said that, I sit here knowing that when you fill an application in for a Section 19 as a practical issue, you can't go past a certain point without agreeing to pay. And that's a glitch within our system. And we haven't addressed that glitch as yet because we put a complete embargo on issuing any invoices for Section 19 to any school. So at the minute, my advice to head teachers is tick the box, because it's just an administrative thing. You will not be held to account for ticking the box. Go through the system and apply for the Section 19, because at the minute, we're not invoicing anybody for Section 19. But obviously, if we, depending on the support that we get today and what I feed back to the senior leadership team, when we take this forward, we will address that glitch in the system. And head teachers in the future will be able to say, yes, I agree to pay the sum, or no, I don't agree to pay the sum. So it's just a glitch, but at this moment in time, it didn't feel like it was worth fixing the problem when we'd actually put a complete embargo on invoices. A significant part and significant principle is that we have changed our position on what we will be recouping from. So we are now only looking to recoup from the basic entitlement of the age-rated pupil unit. So this caused a lot of confusion in the original scheme. I'm not a financial expert, and there are other people who can explain this much, much better than me, but my basic understanding was there are additional charges that are put on for schools, which mean that different schools end up with different RPU levels. You'll all know this much better than me. And what that meant was one school was being charged this much, another school was being charged this much, and it caused merry mayhem and lots of inquiries and confusions. We recognised that quite quickly, and we said, you know what, this is confusing for schools, and we get why it is when we looked into it. So by going for the basic entitlement, there's much more consistency. It's a lower sum that we're asking schools to make a contribution from. So from that perspective, we'll be asking for less money from schools. But we felt it was the right and most sensible way to go forward, having had the feedback from schools previously. The other significant proposal within this document is the introduction of the 75 and the 50% recoupment. So again, we had very, very strong feedback that Year 11 students, we as a local authority shouldn't be trying to recoup 100% because schools still had to meet their exam results, etc., exam costs, I beg your pardon, their exam costs and other costs. We took that on board. Absolutely, very valid comment made. So we are proposing a 50% recoupment there. And then with all other children, when we looked at the different roles that schools and local authorities were playing with these children, we came up with a figure of 75% of the RPU for all other students. You'll see that it was 100% for children when they're hospitalised as well. And I won't go into all the detail, but because I'm sure it'll attract comment in a moment when we open for questions. We did a key principle that we wanted to introduce was that schools could still make individual representation. We acknowledge, sadly, that there are some children whose educational level will be very, very low. So a real-time example will be children with a serious life-threatening illness who may want to engage in education for their mental well-being, but their capacity to do so may only be a couple of hours a week, and not the sort of minimum level of 6 hours a week which we ask for. So we accept that in those circumstances, asking for 75%, 50% recoupment when they're only getting 2 hours a week education does seem unreasonable when we ask for the same sum for a child who might be getting 6 hours or 10 hours a week. So in those circumstances, we are open, because thank goodness they're very rare. And in those situations, myself or my deputy will be able to contact the school and say, right, okay, let's look at what might be a reasonable cost to recover in respect of this particular child. So there's always going to be that caveat that schools could say, well, I don't mind recoupment, but I'd like an individual conversation because of these specialist situations. And then we agreed that the money recovered from schools would come to this meeting on a regular basis, and we could share with you the money that we'd recovered, which schools were willing to do and how many schools had declined, just so that it was an open and transparent process, and all the schools could see it open. So those are the principles that we're asking people to support. And it's really, I know it's an emotive subject. We've had to come up with a figure because we weren't able to do that with the representations in the task and finish group. So it's open, Mr. Chair, for discussion.
Thank you, Carl. I know Nicky Mason, who isn't able to attend today, had sent a number of questions through and has asked Steve to articulate those. So Steve, to start with you, and then no doubt there will be others.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that the comments I've made on other agenda items were in my role in which I sit on Schools Forum, which is representing schools consultative groups. But as Alan has said, I've been asked to speak to representing the Secondary Heads Forum, which Nick Mason chairs, and she contacted me earlier in the week because she was finding it almost impossible to free up space in her diary to come to the meeting herself today, and she was asking if I was going to be here. So I think if I'd said no, she would have somehow found capacity to come and speak for herself. A lot of the early unhappiness about this whole issue was actually channeled through Secondary Heads Forum, and it's been discussed clearly many times in recent months. And school leaders do recognise and appreciate that the local authorities has taken the issue very seriously and has come a long way towards meeting the unhappiness that came from schools. However, there is a however, as Carl himself said, the task and finish group was not able to come to a complete consensus, despite recognising how far the authority had moved. And I think there are still various issues. Possibly the greatest one is the one of recoupment, which has already taken place, and the fact that actually conflicts with paragraph 18, I think, or 19, which says going forward that recoupment would only be recovered with the agreement of the school, which in practical terms is going to be quite challenging in, I suspect, only a small number of cases. So the feeling from Secondary Heads Forum representing school leaders is that at this point we do recognise and are grateful for the work that's gone into it and the extent to which the local authority has moved. We do not wish to provoke any sort of confrontation or legal processes with the authority. That would be an absolute last resort. But they don't they don't feel that at this particular stage they can endorse the proposals as they stand, but on the other hand, they don't want to reject them out of hand either. So I had quite a long conversation with Nick Mason earlier in the week, and we've come up with, depends where you're sitting really, whether you call it a compromise or a surrender or kicking the can down the road. But we would accept provisional implementation without full endorsement, if that makes sense. In as much as we would want the whole issue to remain live and to come back as a substantial agenda item for the Schools Forum meeting next term, and that it wouldn't just be parked in the meantime, but it will be put into practice. And Carl, I've had a brief word with Carl. Carl is, I wouldn't say he's happy, but he would accept that process. And the first stage of that would be that there is actually a scheduled Secondary Heads Forum meeting next Tuesday afternoon, and Carl has said he would free up his diary to take part in that, and we could discuss it further then and see whether reviving that task and finish group or working through the Secondary Heads Forum would be most appropriate, and that there would then be feedback on the basis of actual practical experience of implementing this at the autumn term Schools Forum meeting. So that's possibly not exactly what Nick would have said if he'd been here, but it's based on the conversation we had and the feedback which Simon circulated a few minutes ago, which has come from school leaders, which Nick actually sent through on Tuesday, I think.
Okay, Steve, just so that I'm clear, so from Secondary Heads Forum, you are happy with the provisional outline in Carl's report as an interim measure, on the proviso that it's discussed and reviewed on a regular basis at Schools Forum?
Well, no, not at the next Schools Forum meeting, and on the understanding that they accept it on a trial basis rather than sort of set in stone till the next lot of school leaders kick back against it.
Okay, just so I'm clear. And clearly there are other representatives around the table as well, so are there any questions or comments that anybody would like to make? And then Carl, I'll invite a response in due course.
So I'm here to represent all primary academies as the governor. So thinking of the difficult decisions that governing boards are having to make with everything we've heard today, actually, it all compounds the situation. My question is really around my understanding, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but whilst children are in a provision, so let's say in a hospital stay because of illness, they still remain on roll at the school. So the school does have legal duties that they have to carry out, which I imagine is where the 75% probably comes from. However, it isn't just the legal responsibilities one has to carry out. Every school is an employer of staff. And to then have, though, in smaller schools especially, because of the economies of scale, that could be what's it, the word I'm thinking of, knife-edge situation there, where actually having to make redundancies or planned redundancies because of even a single pupil in some of our small primary schools. And whilst I'm thinking about academies in some of those maintained schools, and we've seen the sad growing list of those notices of concern, and that would be a worry for me, that children still remain part of that school family, but actually some of the statutory duties, they could well struggle even with that remainder of 25%. Just to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Do you have a response that you want to come back with?
I mean, we are very aware of that, and I do completely agree that that is a difficulty. I suppose our dilemma is, if you've got a child with an EHCP who's got, you know, let's say provision which supports 20 hours a week TA or sometimes higher, and that child's not going to be at school for 6 months, it's then also difficult for us to see that money sitting, and we often get rightly challenged by parents, well, why isn't my child getting that 20 hours, you know, at home? I want 20 hours for my child at home. And we have to kind of deal with all that as well. So it's one of those situations where there's two sides to it. Both have value, and one doesn't override the other. And I appreciate the difficulty of it. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we're open to discuss with people. You know, like I say, we could look at things individually to say, well, you know, we just had a student go in for an operation, it was short term, their recovery has been fantastic, and they're back at school within a month, 6 weeks. You know, we perhaps look at that differently to a child who maybe had got a lifelong degenerative illness and maybe off school for the rest of their education or for a very long time. So everyone has to be done individually when you've got those sort of unique things, and that's why we've written that caveat in, that we can still have those unique conversations. But fortunately, they are still relatively rare in the grand scheme of 130,000 children at school in Staffordshire.
Katie first, and then... Don't you? Yeah.
I apologise for this question because you said you're not a financial expert, so I'll try and make it as clear as I can. So we've worked out, have we, the ORPU rate on 38 weeks across a year?
Yes, somewhere, yeah.
So my question is, you know, when you employ your staff, many of them are employed full year, they're not term time only, so you've still got the liability to pay full year for your staffing costs. So to be looking at that percentage versus how much a school might have to actually pay across an academic year. I know we've gone for sort of 150, 75 as I'd like to think starting points, but could there be some discussion based upon what I've just said regarding those percentages and any wiggle room there? Because obviously you do maintain that liability within your staffing, and if you've got long-standing staffing, if you come to redundancy situations, then that's very costly as well.
Oops. As I've already admitted, maths was never my strong point at school, and it still isn't. And I did have an accountant to help me do all these figures. But I'll take your point back, because I don't have an immediate answer, but I will take it. Oh, unless Sarah's got an answer.
Okay, so it wasn't me that helped you with the figures, but I would expect that ORPU wouldn't be based on a full year amount, and it would be based on a school year anyway. So that would make sense to me why it would be based on that.
But your staff, when we do our accounts, it's a full year, so the ORPU has to cover the staffing costs and across a full year. So while I appreciate that, and it's teaching time, and totally get that, and the children need to be taught, it's that financial aspect that we're really discussing, I think, here at the root of it, and those things that I've already mentioned. Thank you.
If I could just say I've forgotten the other bit. I was just about to answer it, and it's just gone out of my head. The other bit of your question, Kate, was, wiggle room. I remembered it now. There is wiggle room. Those, you know, like when we put it to Schools Forum before, you know, last time when we put this proposal, it was 100% for everything. This time we've adjusted that to these figures. The whole point of coming here and going to secondary heads and any opportunity to talk is to say, well, is that reasonable? And if it isn't reasonable, let's have a conversation. I'm not sitting here today saying it has to be 50%, else I'm going out the room. I'm not like that. If people come back and say, we think that's still a bit much, Carl, could we put that here? That would be a bit more manageable for us as schools. You know, I'm open to discuss. You know, it's like any negotiation. That's my starting point. and I'm more than happy to discuss with people. If you want to come back with a representative response from your members who you represent, then we're happy to consider it.
Thank you. Vicky.
Hello, apologies if I've misheard this, but just can I ask for clarity on the clawback of backdated payments, just moving forward for secondary heads, please?
I haven't actually said out about it, so well spotted. What I would say, what we're trying to do is, if we can reach an understanding of what is reasonable, then once we've reached that understanding of what is reasonable, we'll then chat with finance to apply that formula to what we've previously invoiced, charged, recovered from schools, and then look at a means of either adjusting existing invoices that are outstanding, or I believe it's issuing, is it a credit note that we issue, Sarah? Yeah, thank you. A credit note for anything that's already been charged. But the thing I'll have to take back, again, trying to be open and transparent, I absolutely welcome a comment that's been made on behalf of Nick Mason by Steve, but obviously because it's a trial, I have to go away and chat to my bosses and finance as to whether we would go through the process of even considering that backdated money that's been recovered on the principle of a trial, because we could do it and then the trial could say, no, we've changed his mind, and then we'd have to do the job twice over. Sarah, I don't know if you've got a view on that.
I think that's a very fair point, Carl. One thing I would say is, if you are continuing to dispute any of those old charges and they're on a bill that's got other things on it, please can you pay the remaining items and don't put the whole bill into dispute, because we've got that with quite a number of schools going on. Yeah, I think that's a very fair point though about if it is only a trial.
The disputes that we had to do with figures, we've tried to resolve with schools. So if you've previously been disputing, I don't understand why you've charged me that much, or help you, or that kid was only off for 3 weeks and you've charged us for 10 weeks. We have tried to resolve all of those. So if there are any of those that are still outstanding, please let us know.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it won't be about Section 19, it will be other charges, such as sort of property charges or completely unrelated items, basically, for different services.
Okay, Anthony, did you want to come in?
Yes, it's a difficult one because we recognise that obviously schools are under pressure as well, and we talked earlier about in the high needs block the increase in costs in the independent sector. We've mitigated to a degree, we recognise, the overall cost impacting by setting very low increase in the special schools and mainstream in terms of the rates we pay, because the minimum funding guarantee has been zero set by government. So it's a joint effort all the time trying to manage this spend down, because I recognise that freeze effectively in funding levels in schools has been in place for several years. This is probably worth up to about £1 million a year, this, and Carl mentioned the funding should follow the child in principle and guidance. Acknowledging what you said yourself, we've got fixed costs on the back of this that we then can't get. Equally, this cost ends up going against the high needs block as well, and we've already talked about how on its knees that is. And this activity to actually recoup this money for this child towards the high needs is part of the council's approved deficit management plan, and the school forum approves deficit management plan. So we all recognise that practically every pound in there has an impact on schools, because we spend it all with schools. We can't make any reduction without it coming from your pockets somewhere, and it's coming against a pot that you can see, it's unaffordable against the high needs block. It's about £1 million, a small drop in the ocean now compared to the amount to spend, because we got £40 million overspend this year. It's a bit like a 0.5% funding switch. If we went back 4 or 5 years, that was £3.5 million or £3 million. And it was against a £6 or £10 million overspend. It was a big chunk of it. it is becoming immaterial now, and it's only a drop in those compared to the big picture, but it just makes it more important to try and manage almost like every penny spent in the high needs block to get it. So, but I understand the pressure in schools, but it's in the context of that wider DSG deficit we've got and trying to manage it wherever, because we can't reduce it without cutting spend with you when we spend all of it with you.
I understand everything, and as a secondary head, I actually think the proposal is proportionate and fair, but I also sit here representing some secondary heads of which they have significant numbers of children that have gone through Section 19 with significant amounts of money to be recouped, of which they don't have in their budget, which means that real children are going to suffer. And all I'm asking for is the commitment to continue those talks with those particular individual secondary school please. Is that okay?
Absolutely. That's what hopefully we've been trying to do all along, is to have those conversations with schools. And I'm mindful of some of the schools that you're referencing, and certainly we will need to have individual conversations with them.
Thank you, Carl. And thanks to everybody that's contributed. Are there any other contributions or questions or queries that anybody wants to raise before we come? Steve?
Thank you. My question, I suppose, is trying to understand the scale of this, because, like Steve, I'm a trade union consultative committee member on this. Obviously, this applies to the primary sector too, because within the paper you can see that money has been recouped in the past. But in terms of the scale of the issue that's trying to be dealt with here, we don't have a primary forum in Staffordshire as much as we would like to, and we did have one in the past. How much of this is coming from the primary sector as well as a challenge, is the question.
Carl?
Steve, I don't have that figure, so I'm sorry, I didn't anticipate that question. I do apologise, but I can get that figure and I'll distribute it through Simon to the members of the committee. But the majority of children that we're dealing with are high school children. The majority of children are high school.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that was my understanding. I didn't really want a quantitative answer to that. It's just that, yes, it will be a primary issue as well, won't it? But listening to what has happened at the secondary forum, do we have the same level of emotion within the primary sector on this one?
The significant voices that have rightly raised concern through the right channels have been high schools. But as you can see from the list, there are some primary schools on there, and the local authority did receive a group inquiry, and I believe there were some primary schools within that inquiry. So we're not ignoring, the primary sector at all. It's just that the majority of these when you look at the figures, 61 young people reached the end of year 11. It gives you an idea that the majority of these children are Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4.
Thank you, Carl. Steve Barr, did you want to raise another point?
I think Carl's probably covered it. I was going to say it's in the appendix, isn't it? I haven't actually added them up, but probably I would guess 75–80% of the schoolers are secondary or middle, and if you look at actual number of pupils, it must be higher than that, because all the primary schools listed have, I think, only got one pupil involved, and the secondaries, some of them are in double figures.
Thank you, Steve. Okay. I think realistically, in terms of the role of this forum, it was to look to approve the premises set out within the report, but I think there are a number of other issues that clearly have come to light. So I'm going to bundle a few things together. Picking up on Steve's point specifically with relation to the comments made by the secondary heads, we will look to approve this model on the basis that it's a trial basis, bundled in with the fact that the task and finish group will reconvene, and part of the focus of the task and finish group will also be to look at the clawback issue as well. Are colleagues happy with that as a proposal? Yeah.
Could I just ask, and it might already have been offered, so I'm not representing primary heads because I'm not a primary head, but I am representing all primary academies. In a governance sense, has representation from primary heads been sought to be part of the task and finish group, thinking that while the numbers are low, the job roles in primary school can be quite significantly different than in secondary, and the economies of scale aren't always there. I was wondering if us as Schools Forum could ask for if there was a primary head who wanted to both maintain and academy would represent in that group, if that was workable.
Carl, you'll be able to answer in terms of representation from primary within the task and finish?
No, the three people who came to the task and finish group were all from this committee, were all secondary heads or representing secondary organisations. So we didn't have a primary representative there.
So it would make sense for there to be primary representation.
It would be good to have, you know, if somebody's willing to come and from the, because we didn't want to open it up to all schools. We wanted to just keep it within this, the members of this group. So if there's a member from this group who represents or is able to give a secondary voice, primary voice, I beg your pardon, then they'd be more than welcome to join.
Fantastic. So do we have a volunteer for that? Yes, Simon.
Well, based on the fact that Tim said there aren't any primary head teachers here, that's absolutely correct, because Steve, I don't believe you're a head teacher, are you, Steve? So unfortunately, our head teachers from the primary have all given their apologies to this meeting. It's almost as if they knew something was coming. So I will email them out and I will ask that question. I can see, Steve, you're nodding, so maybe a little bit of help from Steve as well, perhaps. Thank you.
Simon. Okay, so in terms of who's eligible to vote on the proposal, as I've reframed it then, Simon, who can vote here on that?
Actually, it's to the committee. It isn't stipulated to a specific membership on this particular one, so it's just to ask the committee to approve this.
Okay, colleagues, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. If you're happy to approve on the basis that I've set out, could you raise your hands if you're happy to support that? Okay, anybody against? Any abstentions? No? Super. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you, Carl. I'm sure you were looking forward to that item. Okay, we shall... Absolutely. Thank you, Carl. Katie, yeah.
I was only going to say, if you'd like any middle school representation in that discussion, I'd happily come along as well.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much indeed. Item 14, Simon, over to yourself.
Thank you very much, Chair. And this is the reason we're all here today. Every couple of years we appoint our new chair and vice chair. This is slightly quicker than normal because we just appointed Alan to the position last year because it was in the middle of a 2-year period after Richard Redgate, our previous chair, had retired. Lucky Richard. So we are in that process again where we are looking to appoint now the vice chair. Obviously it was just chair last time. So as is normal through the Constitution, we ask at the March meeting whether the incumbent chair and vice chair are willing to put themselves forward again for another 2-year period. At the time, both indicated that they were interested, so I'll start with the vice chair and I'll ask the question to Steve. Are you still happy to put yourself forward?
Yeah, I was reluctant to question the accuracy of your minute, Simon, because it actually said it indicated their intention to stand. I think willingness to stand would have been more accurate. Yeah, I mean, I've said it many times before. If anyone else is happy to to come forward, I ended up doing it when there was a new chair and no one was prepared to do vice chair, and I actually believe that Schools Forum is quite important. And I said at that meeting, if no one else wanted to do it, I would be prepared to do it, and I'm still in that position, really.
I'll take that as a yes then. I think that's okay. So I will ask the questions to the rest of the forum members. Is there anybody else who'd like to be considered to be? No surprise there. So could I ask somebody to propose Steve to the position, please?
I'm happy to propose Steve.
Thank you. And can I have somebody second that? Thank you, Steve. Okay. Well done, Steve. Welcome back. The same with the chair. Alan did indicate that his willingness to to remain in the seat. Is that still the case, Alan?
I would say it's more desperation, but absolutely happy to do
Not
that.
at all. Not at all. Again, I'll ask the question to the rest of the forum. Is there anybody else who'd like to be considered for the position of chair? Tumbleweed. Wonderful. So can I ask for a proposer for, thank you, Sadie, and a seconder? Thank you very much, Sonia. I'll take that. So thank you very much, Alan, and welcome back, both of you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody. Before we move on to the dates of the next meeting, there are two little bits that I wanted to add. Firstly, I wanted to add our congratulations to Philip Siddell for being awarded the British Empire Medal in the honours list for his service to early years education. Well done, Philip. Richly deserved. Fantastic work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And at the very beginning of this meeting, you wouldn't have heard it because Andrew didn't have his mic on. He literally said to someone, I've got 6 days left. So this is Andrew's last schools forum and 6 days remaining within the authority, Andrew. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody here for the work that you've done and for all the fantastic contributions you've made, and I wish you the very best in the next exciting phase of your life. Thank you. Okay. So the dates of the next meeting are as outlined at the bottom of the agenda. Any issues around those? Simon?
There's nothing like getting an agenda entirely wrong. Ordinarily, there would be a work programme attached to the next dates. I'm sure Steve was going to tell me. But I will make a note, obviously, of everything that's been discussed today that's going to come back to the next meeting. I'll make sure it's added to that work programme, which will be included on the next agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contributions today, everybody. I know it's been a very warm afternoon. Have a fantastic summer when it gets here. I hope you're all doing exciting things, and we'll see you again in the next academic year. Thank you.